Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. I am so thrilled to welcome you to the Intimate Marriage Podcast today. Sheri Winston, I am so glad you're here.
It's my pleasure. It's a business doing pleasure with you, I like to say.
It's a business. Yes. Okay. I'm going to read your bio and say a few more things after that. So for those of you who don't know Sheri Winston, I am thrilled that you now will. Holistic sexuality teacher Sheri Winston is a groundbreaking, award-winning author and teacher who offers empowering, entertaining, erotic education for everyone. Although if I were writing that, I would say who offers empowering, entertaining, aesthetic, erotic education for everyone, because you do make it all so beautiful. She's the author of the award-winning Women's Anatomy of Arousal, Secret Maps to Buried Pleasure, which won the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists 2010 Book of the Year Award. I remember when that happened. It was so exciting. She's also the author of Succulent Sexcraft, Your Hands-On Guide to Erotic Play and Practice. She's also a contributor to the award-winning Secrets of the Sex Masters. Sheri is the founder of the Intimate Arts Center, where she offers pleasure-centered sex ed for grown-ups via a wide variety of practical and transformational intimate arts educational classes, books, and blogs. Sheri's unique holistic offerings are informed by over 22 years as a sexuality teacher, on top of decades of practice as a certified nurse midwife, gynecology practitioner, registered nurse, childbirth educator, and massage therapist. Sheri delights in inspiring people to have a lot more pleasure, fun, and fulfillment. And I want to say that what is described in this bio is certainly true for me. It was in 2010 that I took an in-person class with you in Brooklyn, where we did some amazing breathing exercises and had hands-free orgasms that you guided. And I want to be really clear that you opened me to the realm of energetics and breath, and just in that workshop, I learned to just completely slice through any kind of false ideas that looking pretty is what makes for great sex, as opposed to feeling embodied. I feel like I learned from you through experience and you facilitating this workshop how important being embodied is to having sex. Now, the fact that at whatever age I was in 2010, let's see, I was, let's see, I was 42 years old, and I think that's right. Anyway, the point is that at 42, it was an opportunity to really learn how being embodied is actually the key to fantastic sex. And I first learned that in a living room where you were teaching a small number of women. So it's just really exciting this is our first one-on-one conversation. I'm happy that thousands of people are going to get to hear it. And the one last thing I'll say is that invariably when I'm working with clients on expanding sexuality, one of the books that I recommend is Women's Anatomy of Arousal, which you wrote. So I'm really excited to have you here. And I guess one more thing I'll say is that we knew just from our emails that we have so many delicious conversations to have that we have already planned to do 2 different podcast episodes. So if you like what you hear as we move forward, be sure to listen to next week's episode because it's going to be a totally different topic, but more of the same. So anything in what I said that you want to respond to before we go further?
Thank you. I will say this. I think in our culture, especially now, maybe now more than ever, that a lot of people think of sex as an activity you do with somebody else behind a closed door and that it's performative, right? I think we had that idea about what sex was for a long time, but now because of the internet porn, we have this performative element that's made it even harder for people to be embodied because they think they know what it's supposed to look like and they're acting that out. So I think what you said about the key to great sex is being embodied is absolutely correct, totally accurate. And I think that anyone can have that experience that you talked about. So this is not just for the sexual savants or the, people who are having extraordinary abilities or who look a certain way. Everyone has this capacity. And so that's really key. Whoever you are, whatever your experience is, whatever your history is, you can get to these ecstatic, amazing experiences if you want to. You don't have to, but you can if you want to.
Okay. I love that you say that. One of the things that I say frequently is that having fantastic sex is a learnable skill. And that, of course, is exactly what you're saying here. I wonder, because you're so skillful and eloquent, if we could just go into what that really means to transition from performative to embodied. Like, those are easy words to say, but if someone hasn't had that experience, let's kind of paint the picture for them. And let me just say, if you're not used to hearing the word performative in the context of sex, we're talking about treating sex as a performance, treating sex as something that looks a particular way, that gives your partner a particular experience, versus really having sex be something that lives in your body that you're sharing with someone else. That's how I would say it. How would you say it? Or do you have a story of a client you've worked with that you might share what that pivot is? Because I think as we go further, understanding what the pivot is and what it's going to will be really helpful, because we have plenty of images. Most people have plenty of images of what porn looks like. But what does this look like that we want to be talking about?
It's a great question. And I think it's one of those questions we could talk about that for an hour, I bet, honestly. But I think foundationally, we're confused about sex because we think it's something we do with somebody else, instead of understanding that our relationship with our own sexuality is the foundational relationship. This is my primary relationship. And if I want to have great sex with other people, and who doesn't want to have great sex, but if I want that, first I need to learn how to have great sex with myself and to be connected to my own sexuality in a loving, self-nurturing, beautiful way. And if we don't feel good about our body, if we've got shame messages, trauma history, cultural negativity that's been piled on in every way throughout our lives, if we haven't cleared that out, it's hard to have sex from the inside. Instead,
and let's add to that list. Like you gave some great things on the list, and I would add seeing sex as a marital duty, or as any kind of a transactional thing that you provide sex so that your partner provides the house you live in. I mean, like, yes, we can talk in broad societal terms, but I think it would be really worthwhile as you listen to this to consider what are the either invisible or overt contracts that you have with your partner that has you believe you should be having sex with him or her. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying notice those invisible contracts.
right. Well, notice the shoulds and the shouldn'ts. Right?
Yes.
What are your beliefs around sex? What did you learn about it? What are your experiences? And when we start to look at that, then we can come to a place where our sexuality is something that we choose to explore with ourselves, and we make choices, healthy, self-loving choices about who we share that with. And again, we have a lot of cultural messages about who you should or shouldn't be having sex with. And they're very different messages. We're in the like no win, right? Because if you have too much sex with too many people, then you're a slut. If you don't have enough sex with enough people or the right people or your partner or something, then you're a prude, right? So this was the true when I was a teenager. And it's true now. The sort of you can't win kind of setup we have. So I think, again, this gets back to our relationship with ourselves and learning what's true for us, how we operate, not just the parts we have, which is really important, but also mentally, emotionally, how our heart works. It's about learning healthy boundaries, something we don't talk about enough, but how do we actually know what we want? How do we communicate with other people about our boundaries? How do we understand how they change and grow, and how we teach somebody about our boundaries or how to be a good lover to us? Because nobody is born knowing how to have great sex with a partner. We could self-explore and figure that out for ourselves if we didn't have all the messages that were blocking that pathway. But when it comes to partner sex, how do we learn? Well, we need to teach our partners, and our partners need to teach us. And in order to do that, we need to know, how do I operate? What do I like? What works? How do I communicate about that? What happens when that changes, right? Because everything changes all the time. If you keep getting older, if you don't die, if you keep getting older, things will change. The sex I experienced when I was 20 is different now that I'm in my 60s, and that's normal. But we need to also know the wide range of normal so we don't feel weird all the time and like there's something wrong with us. So there's so many components to this. This is why I call what I do holistic sexuality, because it's about everything, from our ancestors, our genetics, our culture, our families, our experiences, and understanding that we can learn and heal and grow into an erotic virtuoso, somebody who has the capacity to have extraordinary pleasure, amazing arousal, awesome orgasms. And it doesn't take a partner to do that. It's something you can do by yourself. And if you're having partner sex, you can have those experiences with partners. And it gets back to starting with not doing anything you don't want to do. And being honest with yourself and your partners about what's really going on, what's happening inside, and communicating that. These are all learnable skills. We just don't have very good models for any of those things.
I'm sure that speaking to one listener right now who's never had an orgasm, and we're speaking to another listener who has orgasms and things are fine, but they're not erotic adventures. And by erotic adventures, I don't mean, of course, fancy positions. I'm talking about really expansive, embodied, luscious, pleasure-filled experiences. Like, what I want to do is paint the range of, or just refer to the range of where a listener might be, and what is one next step someone can take to improve the relationship with their own sexuality.
Oh, so much in that question. So let's talk about the orgasm issue. And this is predominantly for women because most men have found their path to orgasm. And getting to orgasm is not that big a challenge for the vast majority of men. Women, on the other hand, we're wired very, very differently. And we need to find our path. And if you haven't yet found your path to orgasm, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. It's just that you haven't found the path yet. It's as if you've been wandering in the woods and somebody told you there's this amazing swimming hole and you just haven't found it. You're like, wow, I really would love to get to that wonderful swimming spot and jump in and get wet and just have a glorious time. But I don't know where it is. So finding your path to orgasm. So what I would say is that you're an orgasmic novice. Nothing wrong with you. You just haven't found it yet. So the best first step, honestly, is starting to explore your own body by yourself and use some of your embodied tools. I think of us as having toolkits that we all were born with of body, mind, heart, and spirit. But starting with the body toolkit, breath, sound, movement, touch, smell, taste, our embodied toolkit. Start with breath. Start with touch. Start by taking a lovely hot bath and lighting some candles and putting on some music. Create a temple. Make it beautiful. Make it sacred, however you frame that. And get some nice massage oil and just touch yourself. Let go of the goal. Let go of finding that swimming hole. And then as you're
and not even necessarily, I'm gonna play the part of the person listening for whom this is new. So does it matter where I touch myself when I do this?
Well, what I want you to focus on is pleasure. So touch yourself, breathe more deeply, make some sounds of pleasure, start to tune into what feels good. When you feel ready, include your more sexual parts, your breasts, the outer parts of your genitals. You can do things like notice what thoughts are coming up. Notice what might be blocking you or stopping you. And then just take some more breaths, make some more sounds, let that go. We can play with the reprogramming the mind with those thoughts later. But right now, just focus on that. And then when you get to your genitals, slowly, lovingly touch, feel, breathe, sound. And as you find the things that feel good, you do more of that. And as you explore the different parts of your anatomy, you're going to find parts that feel really good. And that's what you start playing with them. And sooner or later, you're going to get turned on. And as you get aroused, you keep playing with the breathing and the sound. You can pulse your pelvic floor muscles. That's going to help a lot. And you will get aroused and excited. And at some point, you will have an orgasm. Now, you're no longer an orgasmic novice, but you still haven't developed mastery, right? We want to get proficient. We want to know where the path is. And how do you make a path? You do the same thing again. Once you find something that works, you keep doing that. Whether it's using a vibrator or your hand or the handheld shower massager, try all those things. And when you find something that works, then you develop a path. And soon you become proficient. You know that you can get there by going down that path. Now we want to go for mastery. And that means we start developing more paths, widening the path, making side trails, learning how to expand what turns us on, using those same tools: breath, sound, movement, touch, imagery, your internal vision. And that's how we start expanding our arousal and expanding the land of orgasm. And, the thing about this is it's like learning to play the piano in some ways. If you've never played the piano, you're starting at the beginning. It's going to take a while. It's okay. It takes a while to learn. On the other hand, because it's our bodies and our sexuality, we've also got some built-in easy pathways that are going to connect up. And so we can learn how to master our arousal and our orgasms much more easily than we can learn how to play Mozart. Like, it can go and again, if you're patient and self-loving, you are going to be able to get where you need to go. There is also that mental piece, right? It's noticing what stops you, the negative thoughts, the shame, those messages, and learning how to reprogram our mind. So that's another piece of it. And I like the simplest thing is just notice a stopping thought. Just start with one at a time. Oh, I can't do that. That's too slutty, right? like as if that's bad. A good feminist wouldn't have those kind of fantasies. But this is a sin, right? I mean, whatever stops you. Notice that thought, not at that point, but later on, make a note, and then come up with 3 positives. Slutty is good. The sluttier, the better. Sluts are people who love sex and have pleasure. Sex is sacred. Sex brings me closer to the divine. I am divine. Come up with 3 positives. And then anytime that negative thought comes up, you just say your 3 positives, go back to your breathing, go back to your pulsing your pussy muscles, and making sounds of pleasure, and you will get back into your body. And that's kind of like the shortest version of multiple books I've written about it and classes I teach. But really, just that would be enough to get you pretty far.
Magnificent. Thank you. I'm feeling very, I want to start making those sounds, but I don't want to go too far in that direction because we have a little bit of an agenda here with our pussy pillows. Now, if you're listening, as I know most of you do, you won't get to see the visuals. So if you haven't seen the podcast on YouTube, this is definitely a good time to do that because we're going to have some show and tell, even though we'll also describe it as we talk. So let's transition into that.
Well, because one of the things that's really important is knowing your instrument. If you're trying to play the piano and you think you have 22 keys on the piano, you're never going to get the full capacity of the music. But when you discover there's 88 keys and there's foot pedals, and oh my God, it's not even just a piano, it's an organ, and there's all these other knobs and controls and buttons, then you've got the potential to really know what you have and explore it. And one of the great challenges in our culture for people who have vulvas and vaginas is that the anatomy that you're going to find in books, sex books, textbooks, sex ed classes, the anatomy that's taught to doctors and midwives and nurse practitioners and sex teachers is incorrect. And it's one of my core missions in life to help people understand what's actually there. And even if you're just a visitor to that equipment, knowing what's there and how it operates is going to help you give more pleasure to your partner if your partner owns that equipment. So we're going to go on a little quick guided tour of female genital anatomy. And I know a lot of you are listening, so I will also try to describe, but what I'm showing right now is my infamous, perhaps notorious pussy pillow.
And I remember when you pulled that out in the class and I was like, whoa, I'd never seen one. But now I have my own and I'm holding up my beautiful pussy pillow.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is no other pussy pillow like this because I created her. But you have one of the few other versions of the pussy pillow that is anatomically correct. So kudos to you. They are, those versions are there. So what I'm going to describe now is something called the female erectile network. And before I do, let me just say that women have just as much erectile tissue as men do. So, pussy owners, penis owners, same arousal equipment. It's just arranged differently. Now, erectile tissue, we tend to know what that is because we think of a penis and we know that it can go from small and soft to big and hard. And that's because it's mostly made out of this specialized bodily tissue that when we become aroused, fills up with blood. It captures the blood. It holds it in there. And so it gets big and hard and hot and darker in color and more sensitive. Amazing stuff, erectile tissue. Pound for pound, inch for inch, female people have just as much of that as male people. But we don't know where it is because it's missing from most of the illustrations in the books. So I'm going to describe what I call the female erectile network. Some parts we already know, some parts we have, other parts might be the first time you're hearing about it. But I'm going to start on the outside for multiple reasons. One, because that's the part that's most visible, and also because our arousal energy tends to start on the outside and then move to the inside. Okay, so we will start with the head.
What do you mean our arousal energy tends to start on the outside and move to the inside? Will you just say that again another way as well?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about this a bit more when we do the Pussies and Puppies School of Love. But this is talking about how we're wired erotically. So this isn't necessarily about our plumbing or our equipment, but how our erotic energy moves. And some people are more like pussycats, and most women are like that. Some men, but most women. And some people are more like puppy dogs. Most men are like puppy dogs, except for some women who are like that. And some people are just 50-50 both, but not most of us. Most of us, one or the other is stronger. And so as a pussycat person, if you want to come play with my pussy, you don't start by diving into the crotch. You start with the connection. You start with creating safety. You start with showing the pussycat you know how to give her pleasure. You start by stroking the less sensitive parts of her body. And as she relaxes, feels safe, is getting pleasured, she relaxes, she opens up, and sooner or later you can rub that tummy and get the purring puddle of pussy that you were after. Puppy dogs. How long does it take with most dogs before you can rub their belly? Maybe 30 seconds, right? Dogs are like, oh, please rub it, touch it, please, touch it, right? And there's nothing right or wrong about either of those things. But our cultural model of sex is more dog-oriented. The porn model is that kind of genitally focused, dive right in, and that doesn't work for the pussycat people. And so that erotic energy goes from the outside. Really, it starts outside of ourselves in the context and the connection. And then the energy kind of goes to the whole rest of the body. And then it goes to the more sexual parts of the body. And then when it gets to the genitals, it's more on the outside of the genitals. And then only at high level arousal with lots of sexual energy is it a good time to start entering inside the temple. That should only be happening at high level arousal. But because of our porn model or the dog model, whatever you want to call it, we have a lot of what I call premature penetration. We have a pandemic of premature penetration. So for women who partner with men, there's your guy and he's got a heart on and he's ready to stick it in because he's a dog and that's what dogs like to do. And if we are not a good guardian of our gate, we're like, oh, all right, sure. Okay, go ahead, stick it in, right? If we even are that articulate about it, but we're not really aroused enough for that to be the right time. So when we're playing with female genitalia, again, you start with connection, context. You go to the whole body. You get to the more sexual parts. And then at medium level arousal, maybe you get to the outer parts of the genitals. And as you get more and more stimulated, more and more aroused, then it becomes an appropriate time to go for the more internal parts. Does that all make sense?
Okay. This is so good. And I just want to interject that our next episode next week will be on cats and dogs, pussies and puppies. And so we'll have more detail about that. But I'm so glad you brought that in right now. And yes, so it all starts on the outside and works its way in. Please continue.
All right. So let's talk about anatomy. So let's start with the head of the clitoris. So first of all, many people call that wonderful little nubbin, that most intensely innervated part of any male or female body part, the head of the clitoris, they think that's the whole clitoris. It's not. It's just the head. The clitoris has 3 parts. But the part that's most external that we know about is the head. Sometimes it's covered by the hood. Sometimes it's not. It's all normal. And it is so sensitive that it is easy to overstimulate. It's also easy to understimulate because the kind of stimulation we like is going to change depending on how turned on we are. This is why communication is key. You can never guess what that particular clitoral head is going to want at any moment. That's why you've got to be attuned to the pussycat signals and why communication is key. But okay, so the head of the clitoris. What we have, though, is the other 2 parts of the clitoris. And remember, everything I'm talking about here is made out of erectile tissue. So above the head of the clitoris is the shaft. And the shaft is under the hood. It's about the diameter, somewhere between like a chopstick and maybe a pencil. And once you have located the head, just above it, you can find the shaft. And you can squeeze it, and you can rub it up and down and make little circles on it. Now, the wonderful thing about the shaft is it's erectile tissue, but it is protected by a layer of tissue, by the hood of the clitoris, and it's not as super sensitive as the head. It's a much safer place to play because you're much less likely to irritate and overstimulate and hurt it. Shaft of the clitoris. For those who are doing their solo explorations and haven't had a lot of experience of solo play, playing with the shaft of the clitoris before you get to the head is a great idea.
And so for someone who tends to, just to put it more plainly, get off, for a woman who tends to get off being on top, is that because she's engaging her shaft more or not necessarily?
Let's come back to that question after we've done the entire erectile network. So I'm going to charge you with remembering that question because I get it myself. But it's going to make more sense when we've done the whole network. Okay. At the top of the shaft of the clitoris splits into 2 legs, and it's like a wishbone. There's one on either side, like that if you're looking. And the legs are about 3 or 4 inches long. And they're not going to be easy to feel. The shaft is easy to feel, but at high level arousal, if you put your fingers just to either side of the base of the shaft, you'll feel the top of the legs. You can follow them down. For most women, you're not going to find them until you're at high level arousal. You can follow them down and they're going to disappear because they angle down and they're buried by too much tissue. So those are the 3 parts of the clitoris, but that's not even nearly all. We have 2 big wads of erectile tissue under the lips, one on either side of the vaginal opening, and they are huge. They are enormous. And this was actually the first part that I personally discovered. And I discovered it because I was reading a book called New View of a Woman's Body. Keep in mind, at that point, I was already a certified nurse midwife, gynecology practitioner, childbirth educator, RN, and massage therapist. You would think I would know all the equipment, right? I'm reading this book and it says vestibular bulbs. And I go, what the fuck? What are you talking about? What vestibular bulbs? I've never heard of this. So I remember reading it like 3 times, and I put the book down and I got out a mirror and a light and I sat down and I checked out my own body and I started to play with that area and I watched the bulbs puff up and I went, holy cow. Oh my goddess. This was just like mind boggling. How did I not know I had these parts? Well, because nobody told me I had them. I wasn't playing with that area because I didn't think there was anything there to play with. And at the same time...
And you didn't have a mirror out to see what was happening.
I hadn't been looking. But what you realize with female erectile network is that some parts can get engorged while other parts aren't. That's how it's different from a penis. A penis, it's kind of all or nothing. You can't have the head be hard and the shaft be soft, right? I mean, the whole thing can be semi-soft.
That's such a great distinction. I mean, right? I knew that, but I haven't focused on the comparison there. That's awesome.
Right. But with this set of equipment, you've got these separate structures. So if you just play with the clitoral structures and you don't give any attention to the bulbs, they won't get big and puffy. They make it a little bit bigger and puffy, but not a lot. It's only when you start playing with them and they go poof under your hand, like the Pillsbury Doughboy or something. It's just amazing. And they get so big. And look where they are on either side of the vaginal opening. So if you're having penetration and your bulbs aren't big and puffy, it's not going to feel that great. It can feel good, but it's not going to feel awesome, right? You really want those bulbs big and puffy. You can rub them, stroke them, squeeze them. You can do lots of fun things. This is a great place to start playing. In fact, you only need to take your pants off for this, right? If you are playing with somebody and they've got their whole thigh pressed up against your crotch, that's stimulating the bulbs. And that was like a light bulb going on for me because when I first started having intercourse, I didn't have orgasms. I thought there was something wrong with me. Then I thought maybe I tried some different guys, and you know what? Then I started thinking maybe it's them. No, maybe it's me. I don't know. It just, I thought something must be wrong because that's supposed to be the thing. Now, of course, I know lots of women don't have orgasms from intercourse. But I did remember that when we were making out, I loved that thigh up against my whole pussy. But then once the clothes came off, nobody was repeating that broad, generalized, pressure and rubbing. And so then the bulbs would kind of deflate. And then by the time we got to intercourse, there was no bulb action to make it feel great. So that's not all.
You're taking me back to when I was 18 or 19 in a log cabin with someone where I actually in some ways was really not open to sexuality, but then I had all this like desire. And so my genes were always on. And I had these experiences where it was exactly what you're describing, like broad, delicious movement and pressure with his pants that were on as well. And I got to where just doing that, I would have this sensation that I just really loved. And it was only years later that I realized those were orgasms. I just knew that pants on, the broad kind of pressure was very pleasurable. So it's funny hearing you say this. It just takes me back to this cabin in the woods when I was a teenager. I think that's amazing.
Well, and one of the things I can tell you about teaching this information for however many 3 or more decades is how many women have those aha moments where suddenly some experience makes sense that didn't make sense before. And suddenly they realize, oh, that's why that worked or why that didn't work. Okay, but
right. And I always thought it was because I didn't know what an orgasm was. I probably didn't know the word then. I grew up without any sex. I never discussed sex with my mother until I'd already had 2 children. But so I like had understood all of that in hindsight, but not that the cause of it was exactly what you just described.
And we're not done. There's more erectile tissue.
Okay, well, let's keep going.
Now we're going inside, and there are 2 areas of erectile tissue that we get to inside. There's one under the floor. So if on your own body you took your thumb and you put it in and you push down towards your butt, there would be a wad of erectile tissue under the floor. Now remember, it's erectile tissue, so if it's not engorged, you're not going to feel much. But if you start playing around there, you're going to start feeling it swell up. And if you're open to it, if you had one finger in the vagina and one finger in your ass, you would feel a fat place in the wall, and that's where the erectile tissue is. If you go further in, you get to the thin part of the wall. So this is our perineal sponge. It's spongy erectile tissue underneath the perineum. And the piece de resistance, we also have erectile tissue above the roof of the vagina. Now, let's talk about this word G-spot. So it's named after a man who doesn't have a G-spot, who described it incorrectly, and whose work was based on the work of women. So I hate this word. I hate the G-spot word. It's not a spot. What we have is a tube of erectile tissue that surrounds the tube of the urethra. That's the P tube that goes from the bladder to your pee hole, your urethra. And the urethra is surrounded by this erectile tissue, kind of like a roll of paper towels goes around the cardboard tube. So when it's not engorged, it's like you're at the end of the roll of paper towels. When it's engorged, it's like a brand new jumbo roll of paper towels. So when you're looking for it and feeling it, first of all, actually, you can see from the outside, there's the urethra, you can actually see when it's really engorged, a raised kind of stage. You can see the end of the paper towel roll from the outside, and you can play with it from out here as well, although you have to be careful not to irritate the urethra. From inside, fingers in and curved up, or a toy that curves up. So it's above the roof. It's a tube, so you can feel the bottom of it. You can feel the sides, kind of almost like gutters on the side. If you go deep in, you can get behind it. And it tends to like firm, rhythmic pressure. Now, this erectile tissue is the same embryologically as the tissue that forms the prostate gland. So I think we should.
And also wrapped around the urethra in both locations.
And they're both not just erectile tissue, but glandular structures. So I personally think we should rename the prostate gland, and we should call it the male urethral sponge, because the embryological template is female. So we had it first, right? And all the stuff in our body gets named after the male versions, and it's a pet peeve. Anyway, so this erectile tissue also has glandular structures in it, and that's what can create female ejaculation, the fluid. In India, and it was called Amrita, the nectar of life. And it does come out the pee hole. It's watery, it's body temperature. It is not pee. It's not lubrication. That comes from the inner walls of the vagina. That's like a modified sweat. And I believe all women, if we get aroused at all, make a small amount of this fluid. When we get really aroused and we get a lot of stimulation to this spongy erectile tissue, that's when we can dribble or squirt and have that experience of ejaculation. Which is also a learnable skill, by the way, if you want to learn. Combine orgasm and ejaculation, and it is a really awesome kind of orgasm. Highly recommend learning to do it so you can experience that if you own the equipment. So all this stuff together is the female erectile network. And as we said before, we can get turned on, which is part of it activated, usually the clitoral structures, because they're the ones we know about, and have orgasms. But when you get the whole network activated, it's the difference between singing and playing the guitar. Lovely music. Oh, it can be beautiful music, right? A beautiful orgasm. But that's the difference between that and having an entire orchestra, right? When you get everything activated, because now you get circuits, you get connected circuits of erectile tissue, of nerve pathways, and it amplifies. It's like a quantum leap to these next levels of arousal and orgasm. So that's why you want the whole thing activated. Now, back to the positioning of male, female, penis and vagina intercourse. In our culture, in the United States, many men are circumcised. So they are lacking a very important and functional part of the penis. The foreskin is there to act as a sliding sleeve, to provide stimulation, and also to sit at the opening of the vagina, so when the penis is going in and out, it's not causing friction. If you don't have a foreskin, you're not getting as much stimulation, and you're going to do a lot more of that in and out kind of pounding that we see in porn, which can be irritating to the vagina owner, particularly if she's not at that high level arousal and full engorgement. But that in and out thrusting isn't stimulating most of this erectile network. What happens when a woman is on top? The whole erectile network is in contact. So it's not just about the penis now. It's the whole erectile network is in contact with the whole pubic area. And when we're on top, we don't usually jump up and down on the penis like a pogo stick. We don't do that usually. We roll our hips, we rock, we grind, and all of that is stimulating the whole erectile network. And that is the position that women are most likely to be orgasmic in if they're having that kind of sexual activity. So does that now make sense why that would work that way?
It makes so much sense. And I'm just actually flooded with memories of different questions that women have asked me and asked when I've been a student and they've been a student. And, I think at first glance, it could be like, well, if I'm feeling good, what difference does it matter what it's actually called? Like, I could understand, I'm saying this as a theoretical perspective, that if I'm feeling challenged in sex, then yes, get more education on the anatomy. But I think what you convey is no matter how good, no matter how satisfying your sex life is, you get to have more pleasure with more understanding of all the different women's anatomy of arousal.
And all the equipment, mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically. I mean, the fact is, honestly, when I was in my 20s, I had learned to have orgasms, not always with intercourse, but learned how to have orgasms. I'd learned enough to communicate some very basic things to partners to help me do that. And I got to the point where I could have like 2 or 3 orgasms in a lovemaking session. And I was like, phew, I thought that was really awesome. Well, 10 years later, I could be having 30 orgasms, dozens of orgasms that went on for 10 minutes or an hour or more. And obviously this was even better than 3 orgasms. But I hadn't even known such a thing was possible. But it is. It's possible to have hands-off orgasms. It's possible to have orgasms from stimulation of your breasts. It is possible to learn to have orgasms while giving your partner oral sex. This is a win-win-win situation here, right?
That is pleasure central. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, well,
wherever you are, I think the chances are you can continue to expand and have way more pleasure. And I just want to add also, as we age, these are important skills to have. Maybe your partner can no longer get an erection. Maybe your vagina isn't working so well anymore as you're postmenopausal. Maybe intercourse is off the table. Maybe there's other things that you can explore and expand and do. as you go through, or their health issues, whatever. So these skills are multi-purpose, not just expanding our pleasure, but enabling us to continue having it whatever life throws at us in terms of our abilities, disabilities, and aging.
If we've been playing Mozart, maybe it's time to add in a little jazz in terms of your musical images. Okay, so I have two questions still in our conversation. The first one is, many of my listeners are men, and I want to be speaking to men and women, and primarily in heteronormative relationships, although I think in every episode there's something incredibly valuable for absolutely everyone, but that's really who's listening and who I'm speaking with. So we often say and take for granted that men know their own anatomy. They know how to have orgasms. They know how to make it happen, unless there's some kind of physiological consideration and there's erectile dysfunction. But, more or less, like, men's sex is straightforward and they know how to make it happen. That's actually not at all my experience, both with my husband of 27 years and with coaching lots and lots of couples and individual men as well. I think we really shortchange how rich and varied that. Okay, so maybe those first 22 keys are ones that men know how to play pretty easily, pretty rapidly, in a way that women don't always know those first 22 keys. But in terms of 88 keys, I think most men are not tapping into their sexual potential either. And without going through an equivalent description right now, what would you say to a man? If he's going to use this to facilitate more pleasure for his woman, fantastic. But what about his expanding his capacity for pleasure? Because many men don't really give themselves permission to lean into something unfamiliar and therefore vulnerable, but untapped reservoirs of pleasure themselves. What would you say to the man listening with that question?
Well, almost everything we've talked about in terms of breath, sound, movement, touch is equally applicable no matter what version of body you have. And just talk about orgasm for a minute. For most men, an orgasm lasts about 30 seconds. You can have orgasms that last for minutes. You can learn to separate orgasm from ejaculation and have multiple orgasms. You've got a lot of equipment that you might not be playing with, your partner might not be playing with. Even something as simple as the base of the penis, the part that's attached to the body, a lot of people don't give much attention to. But if you're willing to have any kind of anal play or anal stimulation, this goes for everybody because everybody's got an asshole. We have so many nerve endings. It's number 2 on the hit parade. Like, number 1 is our genitals. How many nerve endings? Number 2 is the anus, or the anal area. So we've got huge pleasure potential there as well. And for male-bodied people, that's the way to access your prostate, which is another wonderful pleasure piece of equipment that you have. So, and I totally agree with you that in some ways, male sexuality is simpler for many men than women, and in many ways, it's just not. It's just as complicated. We're all complicated human beings, and we've also got these cultural scripts for men about what you do, what you don't do, what's manly, just so many things. And so I think it's really great, especially with partners, to be able to talk about these things. I think we need to have, I think we need 3 things in our long-term sexual relationships. We need to be having awesome sex together at some level. And that's like 2 musicians getting together and jamming and making some music. And it can be long or short or, frequent or infrequent, but it's that jam session. It's spontaneous and creative and playful. We also need to talk about our music when we're not making it. We say, how's it going? What's working? What could we do better? What other kind of music would you like to try to play? Or in sex terms, whatever, fantasies, toys, so forth. And then I think we need a learning laboratory. I like to call them a playpen, but it's setting up a time and space to play learning games. There's an infinity, right? That we're just making this stuff up. But say we have that conversation, we go, we're not really doing great with each other with feedback. Sometimes I want you to do something slower. And the other day, I asked for slower. And I know you thought you were going slower, but it wasn't the slow I was looking for, right? Let's play a learning game about the speed of a touch. And let's find a shorthand. Okay, so then we set up, let's take a half an hour and I'm going to touch you and you're going to give me feedback and you're going to touch me, you're going to give me feedback. Then we'll talk about that. And then we'll see if we can develop some skills. Maybe for speed of touch, it's I will tap your hand or whatever body part I can reach with the rhythm that I want you to be using when you're going down on me or something like that. Now we've got a way to make that happen. Or I don't feel good giving you feedback because I'm afraid you're going to feel criticized. And then everything's just going to go to hell. So I don't say anything. Let's play a series of learning games where we figure out how to give each other spicy, erotic feedback. That's part of the play and part of the turn on. And that's a playpen. And this is an infinity of playpens. So you've got those three things, just like musicians who might say, we're just not getting that riff right. It's just we keep getting it wrong. Let's practice it together. Then we stop and we
slow it down, try different options.
Right. And our goal is not making a spontaneous jam session. Our goal is learning how to do this particular thing better. And so that's what we need to have with our partners, I think, in order to keep learning and growing. And as I said before, if we stay together for a while, there will be the changes of aging and health and life stresses and all these other things. So I think we all need that. And I forget why I went off on this particular tangent.
No, it's perfect. It was in response to honoring men's experience, not just in the context of women's sexuality, but in context of their own and partnered sexuality. And it's a magnificent response. I really love it.
Wait, I think, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, another lovely thing to do with partners is pleasure temples. So a pleasure temple is like, okay, tonight, honey, you're going in the pleasure temple. And you go take a shower, and I'm going to set up the bedroom, and I'll light some candles and music, incense, whatever. And you're going to come in. I'm going to welcome you in my whatever sexy get up or something. And you are going to lie down in that bed, and you're not going to do anything but receive. And we got all night long, as long as you want. And then another night, you reverse, and the other person gets the temple. For a lot of men, this is mind-blowing, because they have been culturally trained to be this giver, to be the doer.
Yes.
And they are not used to just lying back and receiving and being okay about it. And you can even tell them repeatedly, at a certain point when they start
trying to do so something vulnerable,
right? Oh,
that they don't even say, "Oh, thank you." They can afterwards, but if they're saying thank you because it's uncomfortable just receiving, then no talking.
Yeah. You can set up whatever framework you need.
Yes.
You might need to reassure them repeatedly, honey, I'm having such a good time pleasuring you. Or if they start going well, I have to do something to you. You're like, not tonight. Tomorrow you can do me. You can do me all day long. But right now, this is all about you. And just help them relax into receiving their pleasure. And without that pressure to have an orgasm. Like bring in the tease, bringing the arousal energy up, but no orgasm, and then bringing it back down, and then bringing it up, and then bringing it back down without this rush to get the ejaculation. And by the way, when you do that, when you do have an ejaculation, it's going to be way more awesome.
Yes. For both of you, That's okay. Wonderful. Then my other question is one that I ask all of my guests who come on the Intimate Marriage podcast. And that is because I believe that intimate relationships are the ultimate vehicle for personal growth. So I would love to ask you, Sheri, What have you learned about yourself as a result of being in relationship?
Gosh, that's a great question. So I have been with my second husband now for 17 years. I was with my first husband for 20. I loved him. I still love him. We completed that marriage because it got to the point where we couldn't go any further. That for whatever reason, like we were done with what we could do together. And so naturally, when I hooked up with my husband, I wasn't actually planning. I thought I'm just going to be single for the rest of my life. Really, wasn't planning on falling in love and getting married again. But lo and behold, it did happen. But my husband and I had a very volatile relationship for many years. We almost broke up dozens of times, and I would think, God, what is wrong with this man? Right? What an asshole. I'd go off into all of these things. And then I think back to my first husband, like, oh, God, he was so easygoing. And my current husband, he's so sensitive. He's so hypersensitive. So Harville Hendricks, who does the Imago work, I think this is from.
Yes.
Or maybe it's David Snarch. But one of them calls relationships people-making machines. Because basically it's like I had this abrasive part of me that I was unaware of. And with my first husband, he was like, whatever. He just went with it. He never went, ow. He never went, you're poking me with that abrasive part of you. So I didn't even know I had it. With my current husband, he would be like, ow, 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 ow. I'm like, what the You're such a baby. You're so hypersensitive. Until I got to the point where I'm going like, oh, I'm not being nice. Right? He's so tone sensitive. And I grew up with a household of a lot of negative, critical, judgmental, eye-rolling tone. I might not say you're an asshole, but my tone would say it. And through a lot of work, for both of us, we each had things to work on. A lot of different relationship stuff, Terrence Real, Mago stuff, David Snarch. I mean, a lot of all of those things. And the biggest final piece was nonviolent communication, where we did intensives, week-long intensives, like 3 years in a row. And that was the sort of final piece of it that really got us all the way to the other side of our previous volatility, which is completely gone now, absolutely totally gone. And so we both learned how to be better human beings, nicer, better communicators, kinder, wiser. And I would never have done that if I wasn't in relationship. And I did a lot of growing with my first husband too. And my second husband, it was like the other stuff that didn't get challenged in that first relationship. So I do think it's possible to get, to grow up, to become wiser.
Okay, well, I think I just really, really adore your answer, both because it's, signature, real and authentic, relatable, the way everything you say is, but also because it is just such a wonderful, compelling example of how intimate relationship is the ultimate vehicle for personal growth, because I'm sure you would rather be the person you are now.
So much happier. And we're so much happier. But it took being with somebody who was also working on stuff.
Yes.
Right? It took both of us working on stuff and each of us owning where we needed to heal. I mean, growing up is a little bit of a pejorative. It was about healing and relearning old childhood patterns and, healing our, developmental traumas and, rewriting our scripts. And so just, we have an amazing relationship now. Not that we never have an occasional squabble, but we just move through it like that. We're just, it's just not even hardly a thing anymore. And I wasn't sure if we could ever get there, but the thing that kept me around was believing that we both were working on it and that we both had the potential to get there. So part of it is really, choosing wisely with your partners too. Because if you're with a partner who's not going to work on it, you can do a lot, but you may never get to that place that you can get to when you have an intimate partner who's not only wants to grow themselves, but wants to help you grow yourself and heal yourself.
That is so true. And that is so true when it comes to the relationship in general, as we're speaking now. And it is also so true when it comes to growing the sexual relationship as well. Thank you so, so much, Sheri, for being present, sharing your insight, wisdom, humor, and inspiration and education. And I'm really looking forward to our next conversation, which will drop next week.
The Pussies and Puppies School of Love.
That's right. Join us then.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. I really, really enjoy it. Thank you so much.